Hi everybody, Deathblade here. For any of you that don't know me, my real name is Jeremy, and I am a full-time translator of Chinese fantasy novels. Back in the day when I first started, my translations were really bad, fan translation, unedited, and I've definitely learned a lot over the years. I've been studying Chinese for about a decade, and I've lived in China for about 7 years straight. As of now, I am a full-time translator of the same kind of novels that I'm about to talk about right now. Similar novels, not exactly the same. One of the reasons I got into the whole Chinese culture and language thing to begin with, one of the reasons was because of these fantasy novels, specifically wuxia novels, which are the martial arts genre of novels. Now, a few disclaimers before I get into the nitty gritty. First of all, the stuff that I translate is on a totally different level than this, and I'm talking the lower level. I translate what's essentially pulp fiction, unedited, a lot lower quality of writing than the quality of writing of the novel that we're going to be talking about in a second. That having been said, I translate a high volume of content compared to this novel. So I've up to this point in my career as a translator, which is only a few years long, I have translated upwards of something like about 4 million or 5 million Chinese characters. I can't even remember for sure. In terms of the English word count of the work that I've translated, it's well over 3 million words. So that's a lot, I would say. Anyway, so one of the reasons I got into this whole thing to begin with was because of these wuxia novels. And so therefore, when I heard that one of the most classic and famous wuxia novels of all time was going to be officially licensed and published in English, I was really excited. I really want these novels to be more popular, especially the classic novels like the Jinyong, or also known as Louis Cha. His trilogy, The Legend of the Condor Heroes, being the first book in that trilogy, or Legends of the Condor Heroes, as it has been changed to. Definitely very famous in all of China. It's being billed as the Lord of the Rings of China, but to be honest, it's actually far beyond that because, everybody in China, I would venture to say almost everybody, has heard of these stories and the characters and has seen adaptations of them, if not read them. And I'm talking everything from the older generation down to kids that are in their pre-teens. I used to teach English, and I had girls that were 11, 12 years old who were reading them in school. So these are very, very popular novels and popular characters. So when I heard this novel was coming, I reached out to the publisher and I got a review copy, and I was really excited about it. I really wanted to help promote it for them because I do want this genre and these novels to succeed. However, when I got the actual review copy, I was really, really shocked by some of the stuff I saw. Now, before I get into the details, again, I want to point out that the translation itself is very good. The English is written well, it flows well, and overall, I think most people who are unfamiliar with the genre will probably like it. There's nothing inherently really bad about it. But for people who are interested in the language and culture of China, and for people who are fans of this genre already, of which there are many, there is one glaring aspect of the novel that's really, it's a travesty as far as I'm concerned. I'll explain in a second. And before I do that, I want to make one final disclaimer, which is that, okay, this is actually a little bit weird. So the publisher gave me the review copy, and then I directly gave some very extensive feedback, some of which is related to what I'm going to talk about in this video. And they responded saying that they didn't want me to do a review because the review copy they gave me was not the final version. Which is kind of weird, because why send a review copy out called a review copy to be reviewed and then say not to review it? But in any case, so this is not a review. This is just my thoughts on one aspect of the story. So basically, my main issue with this, and I know there's going to be people who don't really care about this at all, especially people who are, let's just say, unfamiliar with the genre. The biggest issue is that the translator chose to translate some, not all, but some of the names of the characters from Chinese into English. There are two main reasons why this is a really big problem as far as I'm concerned. I'm going to go into those one after another. And the first one I feel like is the most pertinent of these two issues. And the reason why it's bad to translate the names of the characters, to translate, not just put the sounds of the names of the characters, but to actually translate the names from Chinese into English. One of the reasons why it's a problem is because despite what the publishers are trying to make it sound like, this is not the first time this story has been brought to Western audiences in English form. First of all, the story was written decades and decades ago, and since then there have been a lot of different adaptations, whether it's television shows or movies or comic books or games or whatever. There have been a lot of adaptations, many of which have received translation into English, whether it's in the form of subtitles or the comics, or incidentally, the entire book has already been translated into English. Now, granted, it's a fan translation, it's not officially licensed, but you can just search for Legend of the Condor Heroes and track down, I think, multiple sites that have the translation, or if not multiple sites, it's definitely on spcnet.tv. And so to make it seem like this is the first time the story is ever coming to Western audiences is not true. I mean, it's kind of a lie if you ask me, because the story is out there and many people have read the story. Now, whether you're talking about native speakers of English who are interested in the genre and don't know anything about Chinese, or if you're talking about people of Chinese heritage, for example, Chinese kids who were born in America and maybe they don't read Chinese, but they know the stories. There's a lot of people out there who are familiar with the characters. So these are characters that have been around for decades, whose names are known by a large audience in a certain way. And it's definitely not the way that they're being translated by this new translation. For example, one of the main characters of the novel, her name is Huang Rong. And incidentally, Huang Rong is she is my favorite female character in any work of fiction. I really like her. I've always liked her. I like her in both of the two novels of the trilogy that Return of the Condor Heroes and Legend of the Condor Heroes are both part of that trilogy, and she's in both of them. I just have always liked her a lot. And her name is Huang Rong. Now, everybody that I know of in the community who likes these novels, which is a significant number of people, everybody knows her as Huang Rong. But in this translation, she has been changed to Lotus Huang. Now, first of all, the character Rong does not mean lotus. You can take that character and combine it with another character to be a word that is used to describe a type of lotus. Okay, so I get that progression. I get why the translator wanted to pick Lotus, because it sounds cool, sounds Chinese. But the thing is, her name is not Lotus Huang. Lotus Huang sounds like a nickname to me, and I'm going to get into the issue of why it's bad to translate names from Chinese into English in a second. But the point is, there are a huge number of people who know the names of these characters as the names of the characters, not weird translations that sound like nicknames or superhero names. They are just real names. And there's a lot of people who know those names. There have been other translations of wuxia novels in the past that did the same thing, translating the names of the characters, and it caused a huge backlash among the existing fan base, including people who are familiar with Chinese culture and language, and people who are just fans in general of the work. And so to me, it seems really strange. I understand that the publishers are trying to target a new audience and try to bring new people in to read this book, but why would you simultaneously shove away the old audience? I mean, in order to make this a commercial success, the more sales they get, the better. And I'm not saying to just pander to the audience, but why are you going to knowingly just give the middle finger to a huge group of people who already like these characters and who know them by their real names? Why are you going to change all the names? And in terms of the sales of the novel, I mean, maybe there will be some people who haven't heard the talk that's going around about this whole name translation thing, which, trust me, the talk is already going around. Maybe there will be some people who don't hear about that and then buy the novel having already been familiar with the story. And trust me, they're going to open it up and they're going to be like, who are these characters? Why do they have such weird names? And maybe that crowd of people who buy the first edition of this long series of books will buy that first edition out of curiosity, but when they see the weirdness inside the translation, I suspect that a lot of them aren't going to go on to buy the next book. Or there could be people who don't buy it just to begin with because of the talk they hear. I don't know. I really don't understand why the publisher made that decision. And trust me, they understand the situation, because I wrote a really long email about it and they responded back where they feel that, translating Chinese names can be done in different ways. And so they like this way and they're just going to stick with that way. So screw the old audience. All right. So that's number one reason why I think that the translation of the names is bad. Now here's number two reason, and this is a little bit more, I don't know, you could argue this a little bit. I think that fundamentally speaking, under almost all circumstances, translating the names of characters from Chinese into English doesn't make sense. I'll give you some examples why. Let me ask you if you've ever heard of these people. Have you ever heard of brightness Yao? Have you ever heard of Eastern moisture Mao? No, you haven't heard of either of those people, because you would never call Yao Ming, the famous basketball player, brightness Yao, and yet that's literally what the given name in his name means. Nor would you translate Mao Zedong, Chairman Mao of Chinese history. Never would anybody translate his name into Eastern moisture, which is literally what his name means. And you could go on and on that people don't translate Chinese names. That's not the accepted standard. It doesn't make sense. Now, here's the thing. In wuxia novels, a lot of times the characters tend to have dramatic or slightly unrealistic names. And so translators are tempted to translate the names. I can see why an inexperienced translator who doesn't translate a lot of wuxia would do that. But it doesn't make sense. It's their name. And incidentally, when you translate names from English into Chinese, they do the same thing. They go with the sounds of the names. And there's a lot of names in English where you can imagine how funny they would sound if you translated them directly. For example, George Bush. When they translate George Bush's name into Chinese, they don't use the Chinese character for a little plant. How about Paul Newman or Gary Oldman? Those names would sound pretty funny if they translated them, but they don't, because that's not the standard. And I think this is even funnier considering how the publisher is trying to build this as the Lord of the Rings of China. Because, in Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien invented a lot of languages for different races, right? Like the Elven race has their own language. But guess what? If you're a real Lord of the Rings fan, you know that all of the names of the elven characters mean something, and not just the elves, other characters as well. But J.R.R. Tolkien didn't translate his own language names into English so that we would all understand what they meant. And another reason why it's so silly and stupid is because in the martial arts world, most of the characters have a nickname. They have a martial art world nickname or a Taoist name or something. It's something that should be translated because it's like a nickname or even like a superhero name or something. But that's not their name, that's their nickname. And yet the translator chose to actually translate their names into things that sound like nicknames, and then they have another nickname. It leads to a situation where you're pushing it beyond wuxia cool into silly kung fu movies that a lot of people don't really like. And that's really sad because these novels are really cool. They're really exciting to read. They're not supposed to be silly, but this translator is pushing them into that silly range. And another thing that makes it even worse is that, okay, well, if the translator chose to just translate all the names into English, that would kind of make sense. But the translator does not do that. She translates some of the names and doesn't translate other names. Why? There's literally no logic except that certain names she thought sounded cool, so she decided to translate them into English, even though, it's not the accepted convention and it doesn't really make any sense. And going back to the first point to tie these two together, I mentioned before, these stories have been around for a long time. So in terms of convention, if it was a novel coming in to the Western market that, nobody had ever heard of, nobody ever heard of any of the names of any of the characters, then it would make a lot more sense. And even if you chose to translate some and not translate the others, it kind of would make sense. But again, the characters' names have existed for a long time. There's no consistency. It seems to be done just to try to make it sound cool, even though it does the opposite. So these are my reasons for feeling that this translation is a travesty. I'm really sad about it. I'm not even sure I really want to read the novel anyway. I mean, I can read it in Chinese if I wanted to, which was always a goal of mine, and I guess maybe I will and just skip the translation. It's really sad. I know that not everybody will think of it in these terms, and again, like I said, people coming to the novel for the first time and who are new to the genre are not going to think of it as being weird. And I can speak from experience because back when I read The Deer in the Cauldron for the first time, knowing nothing about Chinese culture or anything, I didn't even notice that this was happening. But after you understand how Chinese language and culture works, and you go back and read these really weird nickname sounding names, it just is very off-putting. And incidentally, as somebody who has lived in China as part of Chinese culture for a really long time, what I can tell you is names are names. It's true that the characters are very vivid and they all mean something. But what happens is a name becomes a person. That's their identity, regardless of the meaning of the characters. For example, my wife, the Chinese characters in her name literally are the characters for a beautiful woman and money. But that's, I don't go around saying like, hey, beautiful money or something. It's just like silly. And in fact, we know a guy here in town who the Chinese character in his name means dragon. And we actually do call him that, but it says like in English as a joke because it sounds so silly. Chinese people, the characters that make up their names do not define them when it's used in the context of their name. When people say the name Mao Zedong, they're not thinking about the meaning of his name being Eastern moisture. It's just that's something that will be important when introducing oneself. And of course, you could make play on words or different things like that. Another thing, one argument I hear people say is that, well, Chinese people know what the names of know what the characters mean, and when you just use the sound, it's hard to tell. That's actually not true. And you know why? Because there are many characters in Chinese that sound exactly the same. So when Chinese people introduce themselves for the first time, or for example, when you go to the bank or some other location where you need to give your name and then another person needs to write it down, almost without fail, Chinese people will explain the characters that make up their name because it's not immediately obvious when you are hearing it. Now, of course, novels are a little different because, you're reading them, but the fact remains that culturally speaking, on a linguistic level, the characters that make up the names are not important every time that person's name is mentioned. Okay, I'm starting to go on a little bit here. I really wish that the publishers would rethink this because they're pushing away a big audience and all they're doing is reducing the sales for the book. It's not like translating these names is going to draw a huge audience in. The only thing it's going to do is push them out, because all of the people who don't care that the names are translated, they also wouldn't care if the names weren't translated. So those are my thoughts on the subject. I know a lot of people have been waiting for this video, which is why I pushed it out right now. For any of you who follow my other videos about Chinese fantasy novels, sorry, I've been really busy lately and haven't been able to make new content, but I will as soon as possible. All right, that's it for now. I'll see you in the next video.